Good evening, class. I'm B. Ramakrishna. I'll be taking chapters in specialized reporting. Let's start by discussing what specialized reporting means. I'm sure you know what reporting involves, what journalism involves, and starting with that, we'll see what specialized reporting is. Okay. In general, what is reporting? What do we do in reporting? Reporting is concerned, or broadly speaking, journalism is concerned with information, putting out news and public interest information in the public domain. What is the most of the content in newspapers, like mostly the content in newspapers and news bulletins on TV and news website comes from the following the democratic institutions of the country. What do we mean by democratic institutions of the country? India is a democratic country, right? So there are various structures to make the democracy function. Like, for example, we have a constitution, we have several constitutional bodies, we have governments at three levels: the union government, the state government, and the local self-government, and so on. So, journalism is mostly concerned with the functioning of these democratic institutions. For example, national newspapers focus on the working of the union government. So there are many state-level media organizations which focus on the working, or they just closely follow the state government. Similarly, there are district newspapers or district editions or local news outlets, news websites, which focus on local news. You know, the district level administration or mandal level administration and so on. So, broadly speaking, journalism is concerned with the democratic institutions of the country. Okay. Now, that is how it has been for most of the history of the journalism profession. For example, when journalism started out 400 years ago in Britain, they were known. There were pamphlets, not really newspapers that we have now, but there were pamphlets and pamphleteers. Okay, they would put out news related to public affairs, like what's going on in Parliament, what are different parliamentarians, members of Parliament doing, and so on. So that tradition continued when India became, or even before India became independent. The newspapers were directly, was much of the content of newspapers and news organizations was directly or closely linked to the democracy or democratic institutions of the country. Okay, so now that is what journalism deals with in general. Now, what do we mean by specialization in journalism? What are the specializations in journalism? As journalism profession developed over the decades, some specializations even came into being. Like, for example, sports is one of the biggest specializations in journalism. Sports has been around for a very long time. There are dedicated newspapers or weeklies or news websites for covering the sports. Sports as a specialization, as an area in itself. Okay, then as things develop in society, we'll see newer and newer, newer streams which require specialized publications. For example, India, at the time of independence, India started out as a mixed economy in which government had a very big role. Now that continued for nearly 4.5 decades or 5 decades. In 1991, when India liberalized its economy, okay, or its economic policy, what it practically meant was private sector had a much bigger role from then onwards. Okay, now, so private sector having a big role in the economy needs a different kind of coverage, isn't it? So journalists and journalism organizations started separate newspapers covering just the business or economy. Until that time, newspapers had sections like 1 or 2 pages dedicated to business news, news about markets, economy, finance, and so on. They used to have 1 or 2 pages dedicated to those sections, those news. Okay, at the time, I mean, after 1991, uh, as the private sector had a much bigger role to play in the economy, there were newer publications which were dedicated to covering business as a field. What were those publications? For example, what are the leading publications in business? We have the Economic Times, which started much before Indian economy was liberalized. Okay, started in 1960s, 1961, I think. Okay, and then we have Financial Express, which is also one of the earliest, almost a peer of the Economic Times. Then we have Business Standard, which is started in 1975. These three are kind of old generation business newspapers. Okay, and then we have three new generation business newspapers. First among these, which started almost 2 to 3 years after the liberalization, was from the Hindu group, which is called Business Line. The Hindu Business Line is the business newspaper from the Hindu group. It started in 1994, 3 years after the economy was liberalized. And then we have Mint newspaper, Mint. Okay, it's from the Hindustan Times group. It started in 2007. And then we had the Financial Chronicle also. I think it closed down after a few years. It ran for a few years. It started in 2008. It ran for about 6 7 years, and then it closed down for for other reasons. Okay. Okay. 1 second. So that's about how business journalism started. We can think, or we can understand specializations in journalism in the same way as society develops. For example, in the medical profession, earlier a doctor was a doctor. I mean, people wouldn't think of a doctor as a specialist in this area or that area. But now, specialization is essential. Okay, because things have developed in to such an extent. Okay, so same general journalism profession. Now, as things developed in society and in the economy, we are seeing more and more specializations. So, as we've discussed so far, the most prominent one, the biggest specialization, the biggest areas of specialization are sports. First is the sports, and then second is business, and third, we can talk about science journalism. What led to the emergence of science journalism as a specialized genre or specialized area? Just as the opening up of we can see a parallel by comparing it with business journalism. Just as the opening up of the economy in 1991 led to the emergence of specialization, business journalism as a specialization. You can see the development of scientific work in the country. Scientific projects, and scientific research organizations, national level science education organizations, dedicated science universities. They are not known as universities, but almost like universities, autonomous science institutes. Okay, the development of all of these has led to create the emergence of science as a specialization. Now, science is not as big as sports or business because it's a niche area. Niche in the sense it caters to, for instance, sports journalism is very widely followed. Sports is very widely one of the most widely followed areas of news or journalism. People who are not interested in politics, who are not interested in democracy or economy or any other thing, may still be interested in sports journalism because sport has that kind of appeal among the audience. Okay, so whereas sports has a very wide appeal, very big audience, so dedicated journalists as well. Almost every newspaper has a sports desk. Okay, some dedicated team of journalists who work or produce content in the sports genre. Okay, now somewhat smaller than sports, but it quite strong is the business journalism specialization. Okay, uh, and sports has a sports has its appeal among general audience. Okay, almost any random member of the audience is likely to have some degree of interest in sports. Business journalism and financial journalism is not like that. Um, it has a keen following among the business community or the professional community. All the managerial cadre, all the managers working in various corporate organizations, all the MBA students, all the CXOs, chief executive officer, chief marketing officer, chief technology officer, all these chiefs. Okay, so that managerial cadre, okay, managers, that whole hierarchy of managers, they are the target audience, or they're the they're the bedrock of business journalism as a specialization. Now, as the role of the private sector in the economy grows, we can also observe in society that there's a bigger and bigger section of this people who are working in private corporate sector, that that section of society is getting bigger and bigger. So all of that, as that section of society grows bigger, it also translates into bigger potential audience for business journalism. So that is how business journalism is thriving, one of the most thriving areas of specialization. By contrast, science journalism is even more niche area. Sports general, businesses uh, quite focused on the business community, whereas science journalism is extremely niche area. Okay, it's not really meant for uh, It's not getting recorded all the time. Hmm. Next, we'll talk about business journalism. What is a content of a business newspaper or a business supplement of a newspaper? What is a typical content like? It's for it for some time. The reporting that we did was product launches. Whenever a company has a new product or a service to market, they would invest. And for example, it could be any product or service. For example, it could be even banks. Andhra Bank. There's no Andhra Bank now, but for example, any Hyderabad-based bank announcing a new, you know, deposit scheme, or some company announcing their new products, or launch of a showroom, or all of these. Okay, product and service launches were the staple content of what we did. Okay, much of the reporting that we did in the business bureau and business standard was product launches. So other than product launches, what else do we have? We also cover the economy. What is the difference between the economy, covering the economy, and covering product launches? Economy, by economy we mean macro economy, which is the entire economy. There are some broad indicators, like GDP, gross domestic product. Okay, it's an indicator of how the economy is performing. Okay, then there is inflation, which is a which is based on an index of price rise. How are the prices? What is the change in the price level of all commodities? Okay, they create an index, and what is the change in that index? Is that index rising or falling, or is it flat? So that's another major or important indicator of what's happening in the economy. And exports, imports, all of these are macroeconomic indicators. They tell us about how the economy as a whole is performing. Whereas product launches or service launches are about particular industries. What is the difference between an industry and the economy? It's like this. We have one company, okay, like Maruti Suzuki Limited. It's an automobile company. We also have Tata Motors Limited, Mahindra and Mahindra Limited, and so on. There are several automobile companies, okay? So all those automobile companies put together is called automobile industry, okay? So when we say automobile industry, we mean all companies which are operating in that automobile sector. Similarly, what do we mean by airline industry? All airlines, Indian Airlines, Jet Airways, Indigo, SpiceJet, and so on. All of these airlines put together, or collective name for all of these airlines is airline industry. Okay, that's what industry means. Industry is the collective name for all companies operating a particular, line of business. Okay, so industry is that. What is a sector? So sector is somewhat wider than industry. Industry is companies working in a particular area. What do we mean by sector? There are different ways of looking at sectors. Broadly, there are at a very broad level, there are three sectors: primary sector, secondary sector, and tertiary sector. Primary sector is agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and so on. In this sector, the work involves harvesting nature, sowing seeds at a particular time of year, and then growing the crops, maintaining, marketing, all of that. Okay, the entire chain of operations in agriculture. Same with forestry, same with fisheries, where we are just harvesting the natural processes of nature. Excuse me. So primary sector is work that involves harvesting nature. Second is the secondary sector. Here we take raw material from nature and make some finished products like all the furniture that we have at home or offices. How does it? Where do we get that furniture from? Let's forest. Okay. So we take natural resources and then we make some finished products, natural resources like wood, and we take that and we make some. When the work is like that, you're taking natural resources and making some finished products. We say that it is secondary sector. Okay. And then third, we have tertiary sector. In tertiary sector, there is no physical product like furniture, like table, chair, and so on. There is no physical product like even like a car or a two-wheeler. Okay. There's no physical thing. Okay. Instead, what we provide is services. You know, teaching is a service. Getting a haircut done is a service. By banking is a service. Banking, financial services, administration. All of these are services. Services are where there's no physical product involved. Okay. So sectors are these three: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Those are the very broad sectors. Within primary, we can talk in terms of agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. Within the secondary sector, we can talk in terms of manufacturing, mining, electricity generation, and so on. And within tertiary sector, we can talk in terms of trade, hotels, and transport, administration, banking, financial services, and insurance, personal services, and so on. So, but broadly, sectors are those three: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Or sometimes we also use other terms synonymously, like agriculture sector, industrial sector, and services sector. Strictly speaking, these agriculture, manufacturing, and services sectors do not exactly coincide with primary, secondary, and tertiary, but broadly speaking, they're synonymously used. Okay. So covering the economy means covering all these sectors. For example, what's happening in agriculture? What is the total agricultural output? What are the risks? For example, what is the prospects? What is the expected output for the next 1 year? How is weather going to be? How are other factors going to be? Okay. So that would be that is what reporters who cover agriculture would be doing. Okay. Same with manufacturing. For example, there's a mm, index called Index of Industrial Production (IIP). Okay, it tells us about the industrial output every month. Okay, so just as the inflation index measures the rate of price change. Okay, the index of industrial production also tells us how the production is going on in the industrial sector. How much industrial output do we have this month? And is that do we have an increase compared to last same month of last year, or do we have a decrease? And that is what the IIP tells us. And covering that IIP data, industrial data, is also part of covering the economy. We have similar indexes for services sector, and also apart from indexes, there are other, for example, industry associations. For example, uh, just a while ago we've discussed that all automobile companies put together are known as automobile industry, right? Similarly, all software and IT services companies are known as IT industry. So these industries have some kind of umbrella organizations. For software companies, it's the NASCOM. Okay, there's a umbrella body called NASCOM, NASCOM also puts out data related to software industry. I mean, it's not possible, or it doesn't really make sense to get data for the entire services sector. Okay, so for each industry within that services, okay, we have industry bodies or umbrella organizations within that industry. Okay, for that industry. So NASCOM is one such um, organization, and it deals with software and IT services companies. Okay, so they are also an important source of information for us. For example, periodically NASCOM puts out data like software exports are going to reach $100 billion this year, or because of some factors, it's not likely to grow more than 15% or 20%. Okay, it might put out data like that. These are not actual news, but just to give you an idea, NASCOM puts out that kind of data. Okay, so all of these covering agriculture, covering industry, covering services, all of these is what covering the economy means. Okay. Mm. Then, as I've mentioned, then there are very broad indicators of the economy like GDP. There's a Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. That ministry puts out data related to GDP every quarter. Every quarter means quarter of a year. Okay, a year is 12 months. Quarter is one fourth of a year. So one fourth of 12 months is 3 months. So 3 months is one quarter. So in India, the financial year starts from April to June. Sorry, the financial year starts in April. Okay, so April, May, June is first quarter. July, August, September is second quarter. October, November, December is third quarter, and January, February, March is fourth quarter. So every quarter, this Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation publishes GDP data for that quarter. I mean, it comes with a delay of a few months. For example, the data related to first quarter, that is April to June, will come sometime in September, usually 1st of September. So it comes with a delay of 2 months, but still it comes periodically. So what does this data have? What do we mean by GDP? What is this GDP? What do these numbers in the GDP tell us, okay, about the economy? It's a broad measure of the economic performance in the country. GDP is the value of all the products and services produced in the country during a particular period. If it is annual GDP, we can think in terms of we can think of GDP like it's the value of all the things that were produced, all the things and services that were produced in the country during that 1 year period. Okay. If we talk in terms of a quarter, so GDP for a particular quarter is all the things and services that were produced and marketed, okay, during that particular quarter. What is the value of all the things that were produced in that year in the country, within the country? That is what GDP for the quarter means, okay? So covering the economy means covering the GDP, covering inflation, covering in industrial sector, services sector, and so on. Mm. What are the essential skills, or what do people need to work in these specializations? For example, to work in business journalism, people need to know some basic concepts of the economy, basic concepts and relationships. For example, how things work in an economy. For example, what happens when RBI raises repo rate? Okay, there's a certain interest rate kind of thing called repo rate. RBI, RBI keeps track of several things and it keeps raising or decreasing, repo rate. What happens? What is the chain? of actions that follow that increase or decrease of repo rate. What happens when RBI increases repo rate? What are the various steps until it reaches the last stage? Okay, so we need to know, people who want to work in business journalism need to know that whole chain. They need to know concepts of the economy and also how the linkages or relationships are within the economy. What is, for example, what is the role of government? Is it just a regulator, or is it a player also? Okay, uh, how do different actions of the government, different policies of the government affect the economy, and how do they affect different sectors of the economy? These things are, reporters who work in business journalism, business reporters should be able to analyze and explain these things. Hmm? So some background knowledge of economics and finance are essential. What is it? Just since we've come across these terms of economy and finance, any idea what the difference between economy and finance is? By economy, we mean the macroeconomy, what is happening in the country in terms of products and services. By finance, we mean money, money supply, cost of money. Interest rate is nothing but cost of money. So the amount of money that is available for borrowing, the amount of money that is mm, available at what rate. Okay, these are things that finance journalists cover. Okay, covering finance means covering these money markets. Just as there are markets for products and services, there are markets for finance also. Okay, so that is what covering the economy and covering the finances. So just to recap, today we've discussed about three areas of specialization. First is sports journalism. Um, just like business journalism, sports journalism also requires knowledge of the sports. So sports journalism is one area of specialization. Second, we have business journalism. Then third, we have science journalism. And then fourth, we have lifestyle or metro journalism. So these are the four areas of specialization. Uh, we'll continue to talk more deeply about these topics in future classes. This is all for today. Thank you.